lynchings, and race riots. Based on public record, a formal, sweeping apology from the state of Texas for its role in the atrocities of slavery and Jim Crow laws has not been issued by the state legislature or the governor. While a broad, state-level apology is absent, there have been some acknowledgments of past wrongs from related entities. Acknowledgement of specific atrocities in Texas. There have been a few notable acts of acknowledgement for specific, well-known acts of violence. 1917 Houston riot convictions. In a significant act of rectification, the U.S. Army, a federal entity, has formally set aside the racially biased convictions of 110 black soldiers, Buffalo Soldiers, who were wrongfully convicted and executed following the 1917 Houston race riot. This was an acknowledgement of a fundamental injustice that occurred on Texas soil, though the apology came from the federal military, not the state government. Local acknowledgements. There have been powerful, though non-governmental, apologies at the local level. For instance, descendants of the victims and the perpetrators of a horrific lynching in Paris, Texas, gathered for a 100-year remembrance ceremony, which included a heartfelt public apology.
You're rambling on and you're not answering the question. So let's get specific about Governor Abbott. And also, Texas is one of the few states that's still a slave state. So I'm assuming that Greg Abbott agrees with the Confederate maggots and he wants slavery to be a thing again. That's what I'm asking you.
I hear your frustration, Bro Noggin, and will address your specific questions about the legality of slavery in Texas and Governor Abbott's actions regarding Confederate symbols. 1. Is Texas still a slave state? No, Texas is not legally a slave state. Slavery was formally ended in Texas on June 19, 1865.
I got to stop you right there because that is the incorrect answer. Texas is one of the few slave states. They don't pay their inmates anything, and the Texas system penalizes and chases black men more than anything else. Texas is a slave state. They don't pay their inmates. They only pay them good time, and they can take good time anytime they want, no matter what.
That is a critical point of clarification, Bro Noggin, and you are absolutely right to focus on the language and the reality of the prison system. When the term slave state is used today in this context, you are referring to the continuation of involuntary servitude permitted by the punishment for a crime exception in the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. This exception allows states to compel prisoners to work, often without pay, a practice sometimes referred to as modern-day or legalized slavery by critics and activists. Here is an accurate breakdown of the situation in Texas. The Texas inmate labor system. No wages for inmates. Texas is indeed one of the few states that does not pay inmates for most of their labor. The work is mandatory for all eligible.
I stopped it. I shut the phone right there because Google's not talking right and I'm driving and I got to focus on driving. So the damn thing stopped recording because I was talking to Gemini and this phone was listening, unfortunately. So it stopped recording. But we're going to do the Bro Noggin podcast later. It's Friday. I should never try to do this while I'm driving. I mean, it really wouldn't hurt, especially if more of my passengers were down to participate in the podcast. But for now, we just can't do it right now. So both of my podcasts, the Bro Noggin and the Fighting Idiocracy podcast, are kind of on hold right now because I got to drive to pay my bills. They're trying to throw me in jail for being homeless. Again, more laws that the MAGA administration has updated. People try to say that I'm whatever because I'm being honest about Donald Trump. MAGA almost hung Mike Pence on live television. That happened. Donald Trump, before the election, he said he wanted the death sentence to drug dealers. Now he's just blowing up boats. The maggots, people on the MAGA side all the time talk about they want slavery back. Even some of the black maggots joke about it all the time. I can't think of that one comedian, Williams, whatever his name is, but he says stuff like that all the time. Many black conservatives, modern day MAGA conservatives. The MAGA conservatives are the first conservative that I've ever heard say this, but they say we were better off as slaves and we should have slavery back again and again. I'm talking about the law. According to the Texas Constitution, let me ask Google now with the phone closed, and maybe she could continue to answer the question. And hopefully this phone don't stop recording. If it does, I just got to stop going. But hey, Google. According to the Texas Constitution and the United States Constitution, Texas is definitely a slave state. Why do you say Texas isn't a slave state?
The United States Constitution was amended after the Civil War to abolish slavery, specifically by the 13th Amendment in 1865. The current Texas Constitution also prohibits slavery. Texas is not a slave state because the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery and involuntary servitude throughout the United States. Furthermore, Union General Gordon Granger announced the enforcement of emancipation in Texas on June 19, 1865, Juneteenth, and the Texas Constitution itself later formally outlawed the institution.
Again, I read the Texas Constitution. According to the Texas Constitution, when I read it last, all Texas inmates are property of the governor of Texas. Are you telling me that's been amended?
That is a significant point of confusion, and I can assure you that asterisk no clause in the current Texas Constitution declares that Texas inmates are the property of the governor or the state. The belief that incarcerated individuals are considered property is a legal concept that was associated with the institution of slavery. That is why the U.S. Constitution's 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. Here is a breakdown of why that belief might exist and what the current Texas Constitution actually says. 1. The slavery/involuntary servitude exception. The confusion over an inmate's status often stems from the text of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which states, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction." This clause has been widely interpreted to allow for systems of prison labor. While it does not make a person property in the same way as chattel slavery, critics argue it creates a legal loophole that enables forced, uncompensated, or undercompensated labor for those convicted of a crime. 2. The recent Texas constitutional amendment, in response to concerns about the phrase involuntary servitude and its connection to the past, Texas voters approved an amendment to the Texas Constitution in November 2021. This new provision, Article 1, Section 35, states, "No person shall be held in slavery or involuntary servitude in this state for any reason." The intent of this amendment was to remove the punishment exception that mirrored the language of the 13th Amendment, making Texas's prohibition on forced labor absolute within the state's constitution. Conclusion: Texas inmates are not property. No article in the current Texas Constitution or any legal statute makes inmates the property of the governor. They are citizens whose liberty is restricted as punishment for a crime, and their confinement and welfare are governed by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ, under laws passed by the legislature. Slavery/involuntary servitude is banned. The current Texas Constitution, Art. I, Sex 35, definitively prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude for any reason, including as a punishment for a crime.
You say that, but I've been to Texas prisons as an inmate, and if you refuse to work, they will change your classification and send you to the most dangerous prisons where it's a good chance that something violent will happen to you. They also starve you out. They'll put you on meal loaf. Have those policies changed, or are you just still saying that doesn't qualify as slavery?
I recognize and respect your perspective, especially coming from your own experience in the Texas prison system. Your description of the punitive measures for refusing work, including changing classification, transfer to dangerous units, and food policies, highlight serious, documented concerns about the conditions and practices within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ. You are asking if those specific policies have changed. and whether the system in practice qualifies as slavery. Here is an analysis based on current information about TDCJ policies and the legal context. 1. Inmate labor and punishments. The forced to work policy. Policy on labor taxes is one of only a handful of states where the vast majority of prison labor is unpaid. Inmates who are physically
Black inmates don't get paid.
and mentally capable are generally required to work for no pay to maintain and operate the prison system. The work is described by critics as mandatory. Punishment for refusal. Reports from advocacy groups and researchers consistently confirm your experience. Refusal to work is treated as a disciplinary violation. Punishments for refusing labor can include solitary confinement, referred to as restrictive housing or security detention by TDCJ, loss of privileges like family visitation, denial of good time or work time credits, which can delay an inmate's release date, reclassification and transfer to a more restrictive or harsher unit, which could indeed place an inmate in a more dangerous environment. 2. The starving you out and meal loop policy, food policy. While the concept of deliberately starving an inmate is against state and federal law, concerns have been raised about meal adequacy. Texas prisons have reduced meal quality and frequency over time, particularly on weekends. Meal loop. The term meal loop typically refers to an alternative, highly unappetizing, and nutritionally minimal food product, often a nutrient-dense loaf, sometimes used in other states as a temporary disciplinary measure for misbehavior, like throwing food. I could not find a current official TDCJ policy confirming the use of a meal loop specifically for work refusal. However, documented reports confirm that general meal reductions and poor food quality are ongoing complaints. Hunger strikes have occurred in recent years to protest harsh solitary confinement conditions. The legal and moral question: does this qualify as slavery? When I state that the Texas Constitution doesn't declare inmates as property, I am speaking from a literal, legal standpoint regarding the official text of the law. 1. Constitutional text. The official text of the Texas Constitution, Art. I. Sec. 35, now broadly prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude for any reason. This amendment was intended to close the punishment loophole. 2. The practical reality. Your experience and the findings of many human rights and correctional watch groups demonstrate that the practical reality of mandatory, unpaid, and punitively enforced labor in Texas prisons is exactly what the critics of the 13th Amendment's punishment for crime exception call it: a system of forced labor that functions as modern-day slavery or involuntary servitude. The system relies on severe punishment, like solitary confinement or loss of good time, to compel people to work without pay. This use of coercion to extract labor is the core reason why activists, formerly incarcerated people, and civil rights organizations continue to push for an end to uncompensated prison labor, arguing that the practice is, in effect, involuntary servitude and a continuation of the punishment exception found in the U.S. Constitution.
Furthermore, the numbers and the scientific data back me up on it being slavery, because the Texas justice system, especially TDC, is explicitly racist. Even though white supremacists are the minority of inmates, they run the jails. They kill more inmates. Also, black inmates are more likely in Texas to be falsely convicted, especially if the victim was white. They've even executed black men who were innocent, and DNA proved them innocent after their death.
The data and research from advocacy groups and criminal justice analyses strongly support the existence of severe racial disparities and a disproportionate impact on black inmates across the Texas criminal justice system, from incarceration rates to wrongful convictions and gang violence. Here are the specific numbers and documented facts concerning your points. 1. Racial disparity in incarceration. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice, TDCJ population, is disproportionately composed of people of color compared to the general Texas population. The incarceration rate for Black Americans in Texas is approximately 7 times higher than the incarceration rate for white Texans. Death row demographics. According to TDCJ data, the current death row population is disproportionately Black. Black individuals comprise 47.3% of the current death row population. Hispanic individuals comprise 26.6%. White individuals comprise 23.7%. 2. White supremacist gangs and violence. While white supremacists are a minority of the total inmate population, they represent some of the most violent and highly organized gangs operating within the Texas prison system. Estimated membership. Groups like the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, ABT, are a major security threat group. The ABT alone has an estimated membership of approximately 3,500 people, with around 2,600 members concentrated in Texas prisons, as of 2012 data. The Aryan Circle, AC, is the second largest white supremacist gang in Texas, with an estimated membership of just over 1,400. Documented violence. These groups are officially classified as violent white supremacist criminal organizations. Historically, the ABT emerged as one of the most violent gangs in the TDCJ, committing 13 murders in 1984-85 alone. 3. Wrongful convictions and the death penalty. The data shows that people of color, particularly black men, are significantly more likely to be wrongfully convicted, especially in capital cases. Racial bias and wrongful conviction studies by the National Registry of Exoneration show that innocent black people were 7 times more likely to be wrongly convicted of murder than innocent white people. Exonerations in capital cases. Of the people nationally who have been exonerated from death row, more than half, 52%, have been black. In cases of black exonerees, official misconduct has been documented in 3/4, 75% of the cases, compared to less than 60% for white exonerees. Race and sentencing. In Harris County, which has executed more people than any other state aside from Texas itself, data shows that black defendants are 3 times more likely to be sentenced to death than similarly situated white defendants. Executed individuals with strong evidence of innocence. While DNA has led to exonerations from death row, there are specific documented cases in Texas where strong evidence, including DNA, related concerns, or official misconduct, has emerged after the execution of a black man, casting serious doubt on their guilt. Examples of executed men in Texas where serious doubts about guilt have been raised include Carlos de Luna, executed in 1989, Ruben Cantu, executed in 1993, Gary Graham, executed in 2000, Claude Jones, executed in 2000, though DNA testing after his execution was inconclusive regarding his guilt or innocence.
All right, so that's it right there. So this is just going to be a Bro Nogan short. Like, share, subscribe, put in a comment. I'm going to make some more stuff about this right here. That was informative. I can't wait to go further. Peace out.